Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Where is the happiest country in the world? And how can we measure happiness? Is happiness a good way to compare countries? How has the ongoing pandemic affected people's happiness all over the world? These questions might seem a little complicated to answer, but fortunately for us, the World Happiness Report 2021 was released last week. In this episode, we'll talk about the results of their rankings and discuss their findings on global happiness. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Corruption. Corruption is illegal, bad, or dishonest behaviour, especially by people in positions of power. For example, political corruption is widespread throughout that country. Obsessed. Unable to stop thinking about something, or too interested in or worried about something. For example, why are people so obsessed with money? Evaluation. An evaluation is a judgment or calculation of the quality, importance, amount, or value of something. For example, student evaluations of this class will be collected next week. Mutual. When talking about two or more people or groups, mutual means feeling the same emotion or doing the same thing to or for each other. For example, their partnership was based on mutual trust, respect, and understanding. Stringent. If something is stringent, it has a very severe effect or is extremely limiting. For instance, we need to introduce more stringent security measures, such as identity cards. To buffer. This means to provide protection against harm. For example, people's concerns were buffered by the government's strong actions. Morale is the amount of confidence felt by a person or a group of people, especially when in a dangerous or difficult situation. For example, a couple of victories would improve our team's morale enormously. Frequency is the number of times something happens within a particular period. For instance, complaints against the frequency of buses rose in the last year. And finally, solidarity. Solidarity is an agreement between supporters or members of a group. The purpose of the speech was to show solidarity with the country's leaders. For some reason, humans around the world love to rank things. You just need to spend 10 minutes on YouTube and you'll find entire channels with millions of subscribers making top 10 style videos. Our species loves to categorize whatever we can, and then order things from the tallest to the smallest, from the most surprising to the least surprising, from the best to worst, and much more. When it comes to countries or places, there are quite a few different ways to create a ranking. A few weeks ago, we talked about the results of the most recent Freedom House democracy rankings, which, as you probably guessed from the name, ranked countries on their level of democracy and freedom. You can rank countries on anything and everything, from their economic performance and levels of corruption, all the way to the amount of McDonald's restaurants they have. In today's episode, I want to look at another way of ranking countries: level of happiness. In a world that often seems obsessed with power and money, and is currently experiencing a pandemic and the massive consequences that come along with that disease, perhaps we all need a little more happiness. Over the last year, millions of people have lost family members and friends, found themselves unemployed, had their plans cancelled, and have been stuck inside during lockdowns and quarantines. How has this affected the world's happiness? What is currently the happiest country in the world? And how can we measure levels of happiness? Fortunately for us, the 2021 World Happiness Report was released on the 20th of March and answers many of these questions. The World Happiness Report is a publication from the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. The report includes a number of articles as well as rankings of the national happiness, which is based on people's ratings of their own lives. In a nutshell, this survey was started in 2012 to rank global happiness in countries around the world. The researchers usually ask about 1,000 people in each country a few questions, and the well-being score relies on three main indicators from their answers. These indicators are life evaluations, positive emotions, and negative emotions. For life evaluations, participants have to evaluate their current life as a whole by scoring their life between 0 and 10, with the best possible life as a 10 and the worst possible as a 0. For positive emotions, people are asked whether they smiled or laughed a lot yesterday, and whether they experienced enjoyment a lot yesterday. And finally, negative emotions are measured by asking respondents whether they experienced specific negative emotions during a lot of the day yesterday. Measures including social support, personal freedom, gross domestic product, and levels of corruption were also included. In previous years, the experts used data from the Gallup World Poll, but that was not completely possible in 2020. As researchers struggled to do face-to-face interviews in some countries, this year's report focuses on the link between well-being and COVID-19 to rank the countries. While in rich and industrial countries, online interviews are unlikely to change the results too much, in poorer countries, moving interviews from face-to-face to online can change the type of person interviewed. It also reduces the number of participants in the survey. So now I've explained how the World Happiness Report works, let's have a look at the results. For the fourth year in a row, Finland is once again the happiest country in the world, according to the survey data. Finland ranked very high on the measures of mutual trust that have helped to protect lives and livelihoods during the pandemic, the authors said. According to Johns Hopkins University, Finland has managed the pandemic better compared to the majority of Europe, with just over 70,000 cases and only 805 deaths. Denmark, Switzerland, Iceland, and the Netherlands also feature in this year's top 5 happiest countries. I'll obviously include a link to the full list and report in the description of the podcast and on the Thinking in English blog. But now I'll just mention a few other significant countries. Despite all of the major challenges in the USA, they are actually happier this year compared to last year. Norway has fallen from the 3rd happiest country in 2019 to the 8th happiest in 2021, while the UK has also fallen to 18th. 2 European countries that improved significantly this year are Germany and Croatia, which are now number 10 and 23 on the list respectively. The report makes it clear that trust in governments and COVID-19 have been the largest influences on our well-being over the last year, and I guess this is reflected in the changing rankings in Europe. For example, in countries with strong and, most importantly, successful responses in the coronavirus pandemic, happiness was found to be higher. A significant number of Asian countries improved on the 2021 list. Shun Wang of the Korea Development Institute stated that the East Asian experience shows that stringent government policies not only control COVID-19 effectively, but also buffer the negative impact of daily infections on people's happiness. Australia and New Zealand, 2 other countries with strong and successful responses to the pandemic, also ranked highly. According to the report's editors, the evidence shows that people's morale improves when the government acts. On the other end of the scale, the World Happiness Report also looks at the places where the people are the unhappiest. This year, Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Jordan were all ranked close to the bottom. As I previously mentioned, trust in government and the pandemic response has been the key factor in global happiness. And the low-ranking countries all struggled with both of these factors. How about some more general facts? The report found that there was significantly higher frequency of negative emotions in about 1/3 of the entire world. Again, this was probably linked to the pandemic and various lockdowns around the globe. Despite this, surprisingly, there was not, on average, a decline in the well-being when measured by people's own evaluation of their lives. So basically, when people were asked, is your life good or bad? On average, it's been relatively similar to previous years, despite the pandemic. John Helliwell, who is one of the authors of the report, stated that one possible explanation is that people see COVID-19 as a common outside threat affecting everybody, and that this has generated a greater sense of solidarity. People are working closer together because of the pandemic. This year's World Happiness Report also found that mental health around the world has suffered due to the pandemic and resulting lockdowns. As the pandemic moved across the globe, there was an immediate and significant decline in people's mental health in many of the countries surveyed. It can be hard to compare different countries' mental health performance, as there can be differences in how countries measure and assess this. However, the report finds that the impact has been similar around the world. For instance, in the UK, in May 2020, people's mental health was measured at 10% worse than before the pandemic. And the number of mental health problems reported was 47% higher than usual. Working at home and social distancing also had an effect on people's well-being. People who were unemployed or unable to work last year were significantly less happy. So here is today's final thought. The 2021 World Happiness Report has ranked the countries of the world on their happiness. Finland, along with other Northern European countries, performed the best and apparently has the happiest population. Trust in government and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic were probably the key factors behind most countries' happiness this year. In places with a strong and successful response to the pandemic, people were able to live more usual lives and remain happy. If other countries around the world want to make their populations happier, they need to work on building trust between the people, the government, and the institutions that help to run the country. Hopefully, the vaccination program scheduled to take place throughout 2021 will help to make the world happier next year. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.